Many of you probably already know this book, The Psychology of the Crowd by Le Bon. We'll skim it and highlight the main points about herd behavior, what makes a crowd act in a certain way, and how it becomes influenced. The video will be short and light, if conditions permit. Next week, I'll go deeper. Herd behavior is the term for human behavior in a group when individuals act as part of that group without thinking or planning. The term originally comes from animals, a herd or a flock of birds that move together when they sense danger. Human herd behavior shows up in wars, protests, moments of danger, or in stock market crowds. These are all examples of herd behavior. When we talk about this behavior, we're also referencing a philosophical and scientific theory. Biologists pointed out that every member of a group acts in a way that reduces personal risk by joining the group and copying its behavior. That's how the herd becomes unified. The weak or those with little influence or money tend to follow the group. People whose conscience is heavy also follow. In politics, there are countless experiments, old and new, showing that people will perform actions simply because they saw many others do them before them. Reason. You can see this everywhere in social media. The media's danger is their ability to gather large groups around an idea and make them defend it, even when the idea has little substance, and then push them to implement it in reality without thinking through consequences. This is like hypnotism on a collective level. Its danger is that it functions not individually, but collectively. A negative collective mind forms, where people follow with closed eyes, lacking will, and swept along unconsciously by different ideologies. This process is the social adoption of ideas. Groups that engage in violence are a clear example of this behavior. Members put their personal judgment aside at the group threshold and get absorbed into a collective following the simple rule, hear and do. Sociologist Emile Durkheim explains this in his theory of the dominance of the collective mind. How this group mind overpowers individuals, causing them to become one of the herd. It becomes a coercive force that compels individuals to submit and imitate behavior with closed eyes. Durkheim calls this social determinism. From that point, certain characteristics of the crowd emerge. In its herd-like form, crowds are easily incited and quick to practice violence against the enemies constructed for them. They have a high susceptibility to imitation and tend to trust the group's leader without critical thought. In the balance between reason and emotion, emotion tends to dominate. Feelings swell to the extreme and rational thinking is suppressed. Fanaticism and extreme emotions to the degree that reason is no longer present. This is what led the American writer Mark Twain to warn of the slippery slope of following without hesitation and change direction. In the crowd's eyes, the independent thinker is seen as an enemy of society. They may be accused of betrayal or disloyalty. In contrast, someone who yields to the group and surrenders their autonomy is perceived as learned and wise by the crowd. Critical thinking disappears. The person becomes an obedient, trained being who doesn't ask questions. The French writer François Gaulier told a story about a man named Panurge on a ship full of merchandise. There was a trader who had a flock of sheep to sell. The trader was greedy and boastful. Panurge wanted revenge. He bought one sheep, then used it to trick the trader. He pushed that sheep overboard. One sheep jumped. Then another followed. Then another, until the whole flock stampeded and dove into the sea. The trader tried in vain to stop them. The sheep's faith in following each other was stronger than any resistance. The story of Panurge's sheep is a French metaphor for a person who blindly imitates the majority without thinking. Tragically, the sheep's foolishness leaves them helpless. Their behavior is useless outside that pattern. Le Bon is considered one of the founders of social psychology. Even after 130 years since its publication, the psychology of crowds remains a primary reference for understanding crowd mentality. This book became a manual for rulers and movement leaders to understand crowds and direct them toward desired goals. Leaders who harness crowds are a perfect example. For instance, how mass movements have been used in wars. Le Bon himself hosted world leaders who praised and discussed his ideas. After 130 years, his book is still present in libraries and discussions. Le Bon offers clear answers to questions, such as how do crowds get agitated? How do they form revolutionary groups? What dissolves the individual into a single collective aim? What is the leader's role? Are crowds rational and aware, or are they ignorant and easily misled? These are the topics we will discuss next. Let's start with the era of the masses. Major revolutions often precede the transformation of the civilization, tend to be determined by deep changes in people's ideas. The big events we read in history are the results of underlying forces that aren't obvious. They stir people's emotions. The time we live in is one of transition and upheaval. Two main factors shape this transformation. First, the erosion of fixed beliefs, whether religious, political, or social. And second, the creation of new conditions for thinking and existence. We live in a turbulent transitional era, full of disorder, and it's hard to predict what the future holds. Old ideologies are weakening, while prior authorities fall, one after another. We find that the struggle of the masses is the only force that seems unstoppable. This era is truly the age of masses. Outcomes are no longer decided only in rulers' councils, but in the spirit of the crowd. The power of crowds grows by gradually planting ideas in minds, and then by organizing those individuals into groups and associations. This aggregation allows ideas to spread, unions to form, and entire civilizations to require stable rules. A defined system that evolves step by step from one era to the next, from irrational periods to rational stages, with education and cultural levels offering the capacity to anticipate the future. These elements were missing in earlier crowds. Without them, crowds could become destructive, like germs spreading ignorance. For a statesman wishing to control crowds, understanding crowd psychology was essential. Leaders and statesmen studied it without always realizing it. Napoleon, for example, had a deep interest in crowd psychology. It showed that crowds are often incapable of forming a personal opinion beyond what they are taught. Now, let's move to general characteristics of crowds. In the ordinary sense, the public is a gathering of individuals, regardless of identity. But under certain conditions, that group can develop new characteristics different from the individual's original traits. The group forms a temporary, collective spirit. Le Bon calls this the organized crowd, or the psychological crowd, one subject to the law of collective mentality. One psychological characteristic of crowds is that conscious personality diminishes, while the subconscious personality remains and directs the group toward a single line of action through contagion of emotions and ideas. The tendency to transform instigated ideas into real actions means the individual is no longer themselves. They become a gear in the crowd machine, and their will can no longer guide them. On an intellectual level, a crowd is inferior to an individual. Whether a crowd can move in a good direction depends on how it is properly incited. Such achievements are not fully conscious. But history proves that those unconscious mass actions can create major historical moments. Crowds act like loose sheets of paper blown by a storm. It is difficult to govern them. If the necessities of daily life create a stabilizing balance, such systems, including some democracies, can endure. But a crowd deprived of critical spirit quickly succumbs to simplification, prejudice, and extreme slogans. History shows that crowds respond to emotional, extreme slogans without requiring reasoned proof. Crowds are moved by simple or extreme emotions. Fanaticism and authoritarianism resonate easily. Crowds tend to rebel against weak authority. They only submit to powerful authority. If authority wavers, the crowd can quickly shift from chaos to servitude and back again. The belief that base instincts dominate crowds explains why uprisings and destruction are sometimes inevitable. Crowds tire of chaos and swing back towards submission. Although crowds overthrow institutions and change names, they often retain a deep, underlying reverence for those institutions and may eventually return to them. Now we look at how crowd ideas form. Whatever ideas are planted in the public's mind or incite them only become dominant if they take a simple, repeatable form. The idea doesn't have to be correct to be effective. Truth helps, but not always. You will still find the same people returning to old thoughts and repeating the same words because they remain under previous influences. That's why understanding popular imagination is key. If you know how to influence the public, you can govern it. Let's move to factors that form public opinions and beliefs. These factors are of two types: distant, long-term, and immediate. Among distant factors are race and inherited traditions. A crowd, like any organic being, can only change slowly, often through accumulated hereditary shifts. A nation's true character is shaped by inherited traditions. Without stable traditions, civilization cannot be sustained. Race, in this sense, matters, since it influences the creation of political and social institutions over generations. Changing institutions doesn't happen in a single day. Sometimes centuries are required. Education and upbringing are also crucial. If education is badly applied, it won't improve morals or happiness. Poor schooling can produce citizens who are unfit to serve public life. Conversely, good education can elevate the spirit of the masses. These long-term forces shape a society's capacity for stable institutions. Among the immediate factors, we find slogans and images. The public imagination responds strongly to visual images and to the force of words associated with those images. Words with vague or shifting meanings often have powerful effects. Words like democracy, for example. When crowds are stirred by the image invoked by a word, political upheavals can follow. The true statesman knows how to change those words without touching the essence. Those who attempt to remove these illusions risk becoming their victims. Experience is another factor. Methodically repeated experiences that plant truths in the public soul and dismantle dangerous illusions. Generally, the experiences of one generation may not transfer to the next, which is why repeated, continuous experiences are necessary to influence crowds across ages. Reason in its effect, can be negative. Crowds are not moved by rational argument. Crowd leaders rarely address reason. They address emotion. Now, let's talk about those who move crowds. When many people gather, they often place themselves under the authority of a leader. This leader plays a huge role. Crowd drivers can be divided into categories. Some are active and have temporary strong will. Others possess a strong and lasting will. These permanent leaders spread ideas among crowds like missionaries. They keep repeating the same message until it sinks into deep, subconscious places where motives are formed. They then spread these ideas, emotions, and impulses through intellectual adversarial action. These ideas must be backed by a hidden force. We call it charisma, a kind of attractiveness that some individuals exert over the public. Charisma can be bought, money, fame, or be innate and independent of formal rank or title. Causes followers to obey unconsciously, as an animal obeys its master. Charisma can shift with public opinion. A leader cheered one day can be despised the next if favor evaporates. Charisma even survives argument. It enters debates and preserves a leader's prestige. To keep his prestige and charm, a leader must always keep some distance between himself and the crowd. I'll finish with a quote attributed to William Shakespeare. If you want to rally minds, you need complex tools. But if you want to hurt a crowd, you only need a rope and a dog. I hope this helps you understand the dynamics behind crowds. Take care, and until next time.